Have you ever seen something so frightening, so strange, that when you told others, they simply wouldn't believe you? In this video, we explore real-life terrifying experiences shared by people who encountered something unsettling, but their stories were dismissed by everyone around them. If you enjoy spine-tingling stories and real-life mysteries, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more scary videos that reveal the darker side of reality. I got held by the Australian Tactical Response Team because a work yacht engine overheated and I was adrift in Sydney Harbour. It was the day of the London bombings. The USS Kitty Hawk was being escorted from the naval base as there was a threat of coordinated attacks. Not only did an aircraft carrier nearly crush me, but TRT came tearing up on me with weapons drawn in a rigid inflatable boat, and an MH-6 helicopter. They realized I was in a work uniform and held me in place while Kitty Hawk passed. They then told me there was a Marine sniper on deck marking me and to keep hands on the helm and not move, and he wouldn't shoot. A few years ago, I was working on getting in shape. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to go to boot camp workouts. One morning, while driving there, I noticed a big, whitish dog standing in the road. I slowed down as I got closer, but the dog didn't seem scared of my car. The closer I got, the weirder it looked. I couldn't figure out the breed, but its stride was oddly stiff, almost primal. I shrugged it off, thinking that someone must have fed the dog some supercharged Alpo. Later, I mentioned it to my family, but they just assumed it was just a large dog. I even thought about checking my dashcam footage, but I never did. I wish I had. Turns out, it wasn't a dog at all, it was a mountain lion. The craziest part? I live just 20 minutes east of Dallas, Texas. 3 months after my sighting, other people started reporting mountain lions, in the area. Oh well. I'm vindicated. Years ago, at the start of the ghost hunting craze, think about 2003, I was dating a young woman. She fell in love with ghost hunting, and we used to get scared together watching the Ghost Hunters show. However, I thought of it as more of a joke than she did. She kept telling me her family owned some massive property with a haunted house. Finally, she convinced me to do some ghost hunting with her. Let's talk about the property. Located upon acres and acres of land in Schulenburg, Texas, the property in question is mammoth. Fenced in, it was located in a pretty rural area in the middle of a small town that most people only pass by while traveling the 3-hour drive between San Antonio and Houston. Now, let's talk about the houses. At the front of the property was a modern home called the Wood House because of its structure. So far away from civilization, there wasn't really much in the way of TV. Broadcast signals got you some ABC or NBC, but otherwise, you were pretty isolated from the media and even phone signals. Still, as the most modern house, it had the most amenities, and the majority of people spent their time there when they visited. At the far other end of the property, overlooking a ravine, is the brick house. A similarly modern construction, it was quite a bit smaller and more intimate but featured a hot tub that overlooked the land below. It was stunning, and I spent a lot of time there in that hot tub and enjoying the views. The land in between was just stretches of grass plains, forest, and small pools. Tucked onto that empty stretch of nowhere was the third of the homes on the property, the stone house. Let's talk about the stone house. According to local records and the tales passed down through the landowners, a Civil War-era bugler had shot himself in the mouth as tumors were starting to block his airways. A suicide in response to his pain, the bugler had died close to a century and a half before. The stone house was half Civil War-era quarried stone and half modern home. The house was small, and the modern portion of the home was barely a kitchen and an added-on room. The portion we were concerned about was the part of the home passed down from the 1800s, the original, quarried stone portion of the house. This original portion was longer than wide. The equivalent of 2 rooms, a living room and a bedroom, the two were separated by a single, heavy, thick fabric curtain that could be drawn closed to separate the 2 rooms. The living room had a single window on the back that peered out onto the front lawn. From that point, you could look straight through the doorway, if the curtain wasn't drawn, into the bedroom. The bedroom was tiny, with barely enough space to stand. Directly on your left was the bed, and directly on your right was a large cabinet. A window on the wall looked out on the back lawn. This was the room my then girlfriend wanted to investigate. Finally, let's talk about the night of the ghost hunt. Only 4 people were on the property at the time. It's important to note, to get between houses in any quick fashion, you needed to take a golf cart. Otherwise, the walk between homes could take a half hour to an hour to make. My then girlfriend's mother was at the Wood House while I traveled with my then girlfriend and her sister to the stone house. At the stone house, we set up a camera. The back of the camera faced the living room window that pointed onto the front lawn, while the camera lens pointed forward, through the doorway, curtain drawn open, and toward the window that looked into the back lawn. A straight shot, providing a view of both Civil War-era rooms. I, personally, felt this was a joke, but I enjoyed spending time with my then-girlfriend. We set up the camera, posed, proclaimed we were ghost hunters, and set the video to record. Throughout the night, every few hours, we would return to take photos and reload the camera with new cassette tapes, as digital recordings were not yet really a thing. The review of the evidence. The week we got back to my apartment, my then-girlfriend went about developing the photos we took. She decided we would have a night of evidence review. This would require watching through 12 hours of video, something I did not have the patience for, since I didn't think we would catch anything. She brought the photos over. They were peculiar. Enough to make me feel odd, but nothing definitive. Just lights, auras around us. Specifically, an aura of light around me. Nobody else in the photos had the same light aura around them. It was weird, and given the context, I felt a little uneasy, but it could be brushed off easily enough. I want to make it clear that I did not see any full-body apparitions in the video when I watched it. What I saw was this. After my then-girlfriend and her sister leave the room, you can hear us closing the front door. Then, you hear the motor of the golf cart starting up and the sound of us driving away. I believe, at the time, we were heading to the brick house to spend some time in the hot tub. Remember that burglar who killed himself? Minutes after we've left the home, you start to hear a musical tone. It's weird, this middle tone, like a mid-pitch key tone that soon dips into a bassier note before pitching really high, to a high treble key, and shifting back to mid-tones. As this happens, the camera starts to wobble, shaking up and down. The camera tilts up and down despite its position on the tripod as the musical tones begin to pick up and the screen begins to fill with static, like a tape that's been overwritten too many times. But then it stops, and you hear me, the then-girlfriend, and her sister returning to the stone house. Concerned that I had forgotten to hit record on the video, we decided to drive back. The moment you start to hear the golf cart pulling up to the home, the camera stops jumping, the video settles down, and the musical tones stop. You hear us entering through the front door, me checking the camera, and us proclaiming, "We're ghost hunters." And then our group left through the front door once again. Repeat what had happened the first time we left. You hear us leave in the golf cart, and the moment we're out of hearing distance, the musical tones return, the camera starts to jump, and static starts to fill the screen until the camera goes dark, like it simply stopped recording. Watching this from the couch in my living room, I can't help but feel disturbed. More than anything, it's the timing of us leaving and the strange activity that gets me. Why so perfectly timed? It's enough to remind me of other small things that happened that night. We set the camera recording during the day in a well-lit country home, but my then-girlfriend's mother called us over in the evening and asked why we had turned on the stone house's living room light. You could see it in the distance from the hill the modern wood house stood on. Of course we hadn't turned on the light, I thought. It was the middle of the day. But could I be sure? And what about the fact that the curtain separating the two rooms seemed to have been pulled a little tighter? Suspicious, but any one of us could have done that accidentally while we were in the stone house. But what I can't forget, what I don't forget, is the music on that video. Because that music only played once, there was nobody living in that house. Not seen but heard. I was animal sitting for some friends living halfway up a mountain in the dead of winter when I went to go take care of the chickens after work. It was already dark. I got out of my truck but left it running with the door open since it would only be a couple of minutes and I needed the light to see the coop door. I opened the inner coop door and hooked it to the outer coop fence. When I did that, I got a creepy feeling like I was being watched. I shook it off, gathered the eggs, fed the chickens, and went out of the inner coop. When I reached to unhook the door, I heard a growl. It sounded close and big. Of course, I jumped back and then thought my mind was playing tricks and it was just the echo of snowmobiles or a truck on the road. It took me a moment to regain the courage to try to unhook again, and that is when I heard the loudest, deepest, scariest growl I've ever heard. I have heard the growl of cougars, bears, coyotes, and other predators in the area. Looking back, the only thing I could think could make that growl would be a wolf, which isn't unheard of in the area. I got that door closed, the outer door closed, and into my truck so quick I can hardly believe I was capable of moving that fast. I went back the next day and looked for tracks, but it had snowed, and while something was just on the other side of the fence, I couldn't tell what it had been or how big. This is going to sound so bizarre, but when I was like 11 or 12, I think I had stayed up all night because it was the weekend. I'm 100% positive this happened because I was tired and my mind was playing tricks on me, but it was early in the morning and it was starting to get light out. I was in my living room and looked out the window, and I saw something around our trash bins. This thing looked exactly like the animal from the Phineas and Ferb title sequence where it says discovering something that doesn't exist. The funny thing is, this was a year or two before that show even came out. I told my sister I saw some sort of monster by the trash. Like I said, it was probably my mind playing tricks on me, or it was just a possum, and I had never seen them in person, and obviously she didn't believe me. When I saw that show's title sequence for the first time, I was mortified, and I ran to my sister and was like, "This is that thing I saw that one time." This happened in 2002. My dad had decided to take us on vacation for the first time in like 6 years. We went down to Florida to go to Disney World. We stayed at the Animal Kingdom Hotel at the Disney Resort. It was myself, I would have been 17 at the time, my little brother, who would have been 6, Mom, and Dad. He got us a room that had the extra living room/sitting area joined by a door with 2 beds. I was used to sleeping on the couch at home, and to save us the money of getting 2 rooms, I agreed to sleep on the couch in the sitting room area. After getting back to the hotel from dinner, we were watching TV, and eventually my parents and brother went to sleep in the next room. I watched TV for a bit longer and eventually fell asleep as well. I kept on feeling like something was tickling my face. It finally woke me up. I thought it was the ceiling fan, as it was right above me. I finally got tired enough of it to get up and turn it off, laid back down, and just as I fell asleep, it started happening again, like someone was just lightly touching my face and hair. I got that feeling you get where your whole body just does the goosebump hair standing up thing. I jumped off the couch and ran towards the light switches by the front door of the hotel room. I get the lights on, but there is a full-size mirror on the wall next to the bathroom entrance beside the front door. I just glanced at it slightly, and I swear on my life there was just a shadow man in the mirror reflection. Looked at for maybe 3 seconds, and then it turned from sideways to full front view, like it was looking back at me. Then it stood there briefly and ran off out of the view of the mirror. I was so scared I ran into the hallway in my underwear and had to wake everyone up to get back in the room. I told them I was sleepwalking so I didn't freak my little brother out. So yeah, Shadow Man is real, and it scared the shit out of me. I have never seen it again since. I have seen some whacked out shit over time, so here are a few. Brain slugs. My wife and I woke up camping at a secluded beach in northeastern Australia feeling so sick we couldn't move. We could both barely open our eyes, but we both saw these weird brain slugs on top of our tent. I struggled to get up. It felt like both of us were at 20ic, like those green brain jellies in Futurama. It was really scary, like we knew something was wrong and a part of us was shit scared, but we were so disabled in that moment that we were just like flopping around mumbling about what to do or if something was actually wrong. Then I clapped, and they disappeared. It was like they were there and not there, like those mirror illusions, kind of translucent and weightless, superimposed. Shortly after we returned to normal with very bad headaches and verified that there was something sucking our brains, making us like sickly toddlers. Felt fine after lunch. My wife is stone cold sober, and while I smoke weed sometimes, I hadn't for weeks at that point. Old man. There was a blue-colored apparition of an old man I would see in my house when I was a kid. He dressed like a normal middle-class Australian in 1950. He would pace around the house at night. Sometimes he would tip his hat at me, and sometimes he would pull a scary face and walk away. My sisters said they saw something similar in a dream when they were little, 10 years older than me, but I saw him about 10 times across my childhood while awake, sometimes in the middle of the day. Hands on our tent. I was out camping with my wife in a forest that was known as an initiation area for local First Nations people. My wife woke me up in the dead of night, saying she could hear someone walking around outside. This happened fairly often. It was always a possum or a kangaroo, so I shrugged it off and started dozing off. I heard something shuffling around outside, but it was too far away to tell if it was big or small. It was snapping sticks, but so do roos and wallabies. We were near a river, so wombats are an option too. Then I heard the unmistakable sounds of a bipedal gate very quickly walking up to our tent. We both panicked and sat up, grabbing each other and going silent, bracing for someone to come mess with the tent. As soon as we started listening again, we couldn't hear anything, but then the same sound started again from near our car, briskly walking towards the tent and then stopping a meter or so away. I was sweating bullets, and she was just completely lost in fear. Then hands started pressing into the tent, moving back and forth, all of them around the same size, outlines of human hands. I went into fight or flight and burst through the zipper to confront whoever this was. It was scaring the shit out of us, and my wife was crying. When I got out into the full moonlight, there was no one to be seen. I got her to pass my torch while I looked around, making sure not to let my guard down. When I scanned the wider area with the torch, I saw nothing. When I got back into the tent, we could hear footsteps again but much further away, pacing back and forth all night. Any time we went to pee, they would stop, and they would start seconds after closing up the tent. We somehow managed to sleep, and in the morning couldn't find a single footprint that wasn't ours. Tiki mask, same forest. A few months later on a new moon, camping again, went out to piss, looked up halfway through, and saw a huge wooden mask with red and blue flashing eyes standing about 2 meters tall in front of me. It was very vivid, even casting colored shadows on the shrubs around me. As soon as I looked it in the eye, I went into a trance and saw someone dressed in a hoodie, baggy cargo pants, sneakers, and a black watch. They were superimposed on top of my eyesight, and they had no face, just flat white skin. They turned around and touched the air, and an image of being in the tent minutes ago from my perspective appeared. They stepped into this scene and opened the tent, stepping into a scene of me having a fight with someone a week earlier over what to cook for lunch at the temple. They touched the cheek of the person I was arguing with, and a scene of me being homeless as a teenager appeared. All of these scenes were seen from my perspective like they were recordings. They were much more vivid than my memory normally is, consisting of colors, textures, and full details in the scene, while normally my memories are vague with only a few textures and colors, just an abstract reconstruction with a few hyper-accurate details like a silhouette or a movement, not like the hyper-accurate scenes being shown to me. The figure in the hoodie climbed under my homeless tarp with me and revealed a scene of my father laughing at my aspirations to become a researcher at a top university, in the middle of telling me he was smarter than me, despite us having barely talked. I realized that this figure was walking through traumatic situations in my life, getting exponentially more troubling as they went, and I started to worry, but I also couldn't think, like my mind was put on pause or like a computer that has run out of resources from a memory leak and ground to a halt. Then the figure went to touch my dad's open beer on the table, and the last time I saw him, she appeared. As this happened, the figure rubbed its hands together and then stepped into the place my mom was at, replacing her like a good Photoshop job. As soon as this happened, I started feeling really cold and weak, like I had been awake for days and hadn't eaten enough for my body to supply its own heat. I started feeling a sense of dread. This whole time I couldn't move a muscle, like sleep paralysis. At that moment my wife called out to me to ask what I was doing, and the figure quickly went in reverse, like hitting rewind on a tape, and uncovered my vision. The feeling rushed back into my body, and I felt normal again. I was just standing there with my dick out. I went to put it away and then realized I still needed to pee, so I finished and went back to sleep. There is other weird stuff, like a rotting cow I would see on the edge of the temple grounds standing in the forest with glinting white eyes, a snake coming out of a cursed flute given to me by a mysterious man that attacked me in my dreams, causing me to destroy my room. I never move when I sleep, a dark figure made of twisted coral-like stuff that stood behind a girl I knew, a 3-foot-tall deformed shirtless man who followed my wife and me 5 miles in the middle of the night in winter on country backroads in England, and writhing miasma of ghosts sweeping through the streets in the dead of night in London like a mobile catacomb. Now that I think about it, I've seen a lot of really weird shit, but it's not part of my personality. I don't talk about this kind of stuff ever, and no one knows I've seen this stuff except for my wife with the stuff we've seen together. She gets scared easily, so I would never tell her any of this. Around 20 years ago I was sitting with a friend out on the patio of his apartment just off Purdue's campus. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and we were just having a few smokes before going to bed. We had just been sitting there in silence, facing a small parking lot that had a grassy central common area on the other side of it, when I noticed a small shimmer in the grass past the parking lot. Suddenly I saw a strange movement emitting from the spot where the shimmer occurred. Imagine how a pool of water ripples when you drop something in it. That's what I saw the ground doing. A circular wave rolling outward in all directions. It looked like the ground itself rippled, like it was physically rolling. I saw it move from the grass, out to Thet, which appeared to move too, over the sidewalk, onto the grass of the yard in front of me, and finally fade right before it hit the slab of the patio I was on. I just watched in silence, barely able to believe what I was seeing. It didn't last too long, and after about 20 seconds of trying to process everything, my friend whispers, "Did you see that?" We both verified what we saw to each other and went to investigate. There was no disturbed soil or cracked pavement anywhere that we could see, and nothing strange at the site of the initial shimmer. Despite looking into it and talking to plenty of people about it over the years, I've never gotten any explanation. I've talked to utility workers, asked about visible components of gas leaks, revisited the area, and plenty more, all to no avail. The only responses I get are that we must have been high, we were not, or that we were somehow randomly experiencing identical hallucinations simultaneously. The whole thing still gives me the chills when I think of it. That friend died over a decade ago, so I've had no one to back up my story for years. I wish I had some idea of what it was we saw or what could make two sober people share an identical hallucination without talking about it. I've never even heard of anyone else having a similar experience. When I was in 6th or 7th grade, I was home alone for one of the first times. I was in my room watching something on TV when I heard our dog start barking like crazy. I called for her, but she would not stop barking, so I went to where she was standing by the door to see what she was barking at, thinking there was probably a stray cat or something on our porch. Our door had a window on the side that was probably about 6 feet tall, so it was very easy to see and out of the house. When I got to the door, I saw a man standing at the window looking in. I did not recognize this man and hadn't even heard the doorbell or any knocking, which I would have from where my room was. When he saw me looking at him, he pointed at the doorknob, seemingly asking me to let him in. My dog was still going crazy at this point, so I ran into the bathroom and locked myself in there and called my parents. I was so obviously freaked out that they came home immediately, but by the time they got there, no one was around. My mom used to clean a church daycare after hours. I went with her to help sometimes, and this particular time we had gone to get dinner before starting the cleaning, so it was already night when we got started. We finished up at about 8 to 9 p.m., and we were in the office writing out lunch breaks for the teachers on the whiteboard when we heard what sounded like a large number of people talking to each other at the same time. It sounded like 100 people in a gymnasium all talking at the same time. The sound started pretty quiet, but it soon grew loud enough that we stopped our conversation to ask if both of us were hearing that. A few seconds after we acknowledged the noise, it stopped completely. We left very quickly after, and the entire church was dark, and both of its parking lots were empty as we drove by. No one that we've told believes us, but at least both of us experienced the same thing. Camping with friends in the remote outback of Australia. 3 days drive from anywhere. Only contact by codon or satellite phone. We were traveling along, checking the fencing of the sheep station we were on. Anyway, one night I and my 2 mates were getting ready to turn in for the night as usual, sleeping in tents under a magnificent Milky Way night. Just as we were about to bunk down, a white guy about 50 years old, wearing a well-tailored black single-breasted suit and black leather shoes, walked into the campsite. He was tall and thin, well-groomed, with dark, shiny black hair, kind of like a young Rock Hudson hairstyle. He kind of glanced at us and said, "Hi." With a slight tilt of his head, he kept on walking straight through the camp, past the fire, and off into the night. We were totally stunned. After a gobsmacked minute, we started the "Did you see that?" and the WTF routine. It scared the shit out of us. Well, we obviously shit our pants. Didn't know what to do, so got onto the back of the truck and lit the place up with the floodlights. No sign. Thinking he might be lost, we yelled out, hit the horn, and turned on the yellow flashing strobe on the truck roof. Not a wink of sleep that night. Come sunup, we followed his footprints for about 50 yards in a dead straight line until they petered out on hard-packed clay pan. We walked the footprints backwards from the fire, and they started at stony ground. We rang it into the station owner and the police, thinking someone was lost. Details were taken, but nothing really happened after that, so we just went back to fencing, but it unnerved the fuck out of us. Didn't sleep well for the next week. The weirdest thing I remember is that he had a gold watch on his right hand. It glinted in the lamplight. When I was working on a remote site near the border into Alaska, I was attacked by a wolverine after pulling over to take a pee in -40 degrees Celsius. I had gotten out of my truck at 1 to 2 a.m. in a snow ravine with 20 feet walls. I unzipped and began to take a pee. Glancing ahead of my vehicle, I noticed something about 30 yards ahead in the light of my headlights. By the time my brain registered I saw something and I looked back, 2 seconds, the wolverine, I thought it was a bear, was in full sprint barreling towards the car and roughly half the distance away. Fortunately, the snow was deep and my door was open. I leapt into the driver's seat and turned to close the door just as the wolverine burst out from underneath it. Snow and fangs and claws. I kicked that creature in the face and managed to slam my door shut. I locked it and sat there in shock for a minute or so before finally coming to terms with what had just happened. There was pee everywhere. My adult daughter and I went backpacking in a park in rural Ohio. We are in the middle of nowhere, several miles from the trailhead. It was late in the season, so we only saw a couple of hikers. After we ate and settled into bed, the coyotes started. It was about 1 a.m. They were yipping and howling, normal coyote stuff. They kept getting closer. Then the pack got something and went nuts, and if you've ever been alone in the woods and heard a large pack of coyotes, it was pretty intense. They kept it up for an hour or so. Then everything calmed down. Then around 3 a.m. the mariachi music starts. It's really loud Mexican restaurant music in the middle of the woods in nowhere, Ohio. It was so weird. It was loud enough you couldn't figure out what direction it was coming from. We were talking between our tents, and I was suggesting we just walk back to the car and come back for our gear in the morning. She was not interested since we'd have to walk back in the dark with coyotes celebrating their catch with a mariachi music party. No, thanks, we'll stay in the tents. I have 3. Paranormal? I was at my friend's house when we were about 10 years old. It was dusk time, his parents were out for the evening. His younger sister and little brother were in the house with us, which was 3 stories. We decided to play hide and seek at some point. When it was my turn to find people, I found my friend and his sister first. Then we were all on different floors looking for his little brother. I walked into a bathroom on the main floor where the lights were off. The sink and mirror were to the left of the door. As I stepped in, I saw a shadowy figure standing on the sink. As I was about to call out to everyone that I found his little brother, my friend yelled from upstairs that they found his little brother. As soon as he said that, I stepped back and ran like hell upstairs. I told everyone to huddle in his room and close the door. We were freaked the fuck out, lol. Eventually we turned on every light we could and made our way together to the bathroom. I still remember my heart pounding as I walked towards that door. We turned on the lights and looked around, but there was nothing. We stayed in his room till his parents came home, and then I had to go home alone in the dark on my bike through, 2 alleyways, lol. Probably just a trick of my eye, but definitely a weird, scary moment. Unexplained. We were in the northern part of Ontario on my dad's property, 50 acres of forest. We were just stargazing, my family and my brother-in-law. My dad is big into aviation, and my brother-in-law is big into astronomy and anything tech. It was a relatively cloudless night. We were watching the skies and saw the ISS float above us. Saw a few planes and a few shooting stars. Then, out of nowhere, we see a very bright object in the sky. It felt like it was at least as high as a meteorite coming into the atmosphere. But this thing sped across the sky faster than anything we had seen. It then started doing a quick direct change in a zigzag pattern, and then it flew off out of view. My whole family saw it, my dad had no idea what it was, and my Bill had no explanation. I did not either. We were thinking maybe it was something weird in an orbit, though it would not explain the zigzag pattern. Then, while still discussing it, probably 5 to 10 minutes later, it came back from the opposite direction, did some more erratic maneuvers, including stopping one time in the sky, and then vanished after flying quickly across the sky. It was in our visual field for 20 plus seconds or so each time. I have no explanation for this. I have done some reading, and the closest thing I have found is this video, though the object or phenomenon I saw was much more erratic in its behavior. I even watched the unidentified aerial phenomenon reports from US Congress a year or 2 ago in their entirety to see if I could find any answers. Still remains unexplained for me. Fun one. I used to do crazy shit when I was younger. I would go on runs at 3 a.m. through forests and do other very dumb stuff just for the adrenaline. I also used to play basketball at the local school net a few minutes from my house, dumb in hindsight, because I probably annoyed the heck out of the house owners around lol. It was probably around 1 a.m., and I was putting up some shots with only one small light illuminating the court. Then I look into the distance in the field and see a white apparition slowly moving towards me, probably 200 feet out from the pitch black. I stopped dribbling and froze in my tracks. I was perplexed and almost thought it was comical how this was happening to me. I kept observing the apparition move closer to me, and then I saw a smaller, faster little white object circling the first white figure. Turns out it was a dude walking his little white dog in all white clothes in the damn dark, lol. Had a good laugh about that. I eventually stopped playing basketball there at night when one day I heard a blood-curdling scream come from one of the houses around the field. That was the limit for me. In hindsight, a lot of badness happened to me in those times, but I always felt capable of running away quickly enough had I needed to. I will preface by saying I've never been a believer in supernatural stuff. I've always believed there are reasonable explanations for things that people just aren't aware of. However, 2 things have changed my mind, at least about spirits, for lack of a better term. 1. When I was 19 to 20, I worked as a live-in caregiver for an elderly lady, let's call her B, who had recently lost her husband of over 60 years. She was diagnosed as failure to thrive. Nothing in particular was killing her, per se, but she had basically given up on everything and was slowly deteriorating. Prior to the death of her husband, she had also lost all of her siblings and both of her daughters. So it was just me, my dog, and her living in the house. Her room was upstairs, she couldn't get out of bed without assistance, and I lived downstairs with my dog. I had a baby monitor so I could hear if she was awake or needed help at night. A couple of times toward the end of her life, I was in bed, and my dog suddenly sat up at full alert, hackles raised, and then bolted out of my room. Complete silence on the baby monitor, but just as I would hear his little footsteps as he ran across the living room that was directly above my room, I would hear B start having a full-on conversation with someone. Obviously, I could only hear her side of the conversation. She wasn't frantic or anything, just having a calm conversation with someone who wasn't there. Both times, I went up to check on her, and she was surprisingly lucid, which she rarely was at that point, and when I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd say something like, "Oh, I'm talking to my husband/sister." I know that probably sounds crazy to you, but it's actually quite nice to see them. 2. A few years later, I had moved out of state for college and started to get sleep paralysis multiple times per week. Even though it happened so frequently, it was always terrifying and felt real while it was happening, so I would inevitably start trying to scream. Obviously, no sound would come out, but I guess as my body started to wake up, I would make little squeaks. My then boyfriend would gently help me wake up whenever he heard the squeaks, so he's the one person that knows how frequently it happened and how much it scared me. The weird thing is, I stopped getting it altogether when I moved out of the apartment we were living in. I can't think of a single time I've experienced it since. It just stopped happening as suddenly as it had started. The apartment building we lived in had been a mental hospital before being turned into apartments. I never saw or felt anything else while living there that was unsettling, but have always wondered if and how that could have anything to do with my sleep paralysis. Once I was driving out in the country with two friends. My one friend was driving, and the other was sitting in the back seat. I was in the front passenger seat. We were on a road that was right next to the ocean, but there were trees covering the view of the water for most of the way, although occasionally there would be a break in the trees where you could see out to the ocean every couple hundred meters or so. All of a sudden, as we were driving past a break in the trees, my friend sitting in the back goes, "Oh my God, it's a UFO." And I look, expecting to see some light in the sky or something. But no. There it was. A huge craft. Stereotypical saucer shape, with red and green lights flashing in sequence around the perimeter. It was maybe a football field distance away from us, hovering about 75 feet above the ocean. I was in disbelief. We only saw it for maybe 5 seconds before the trees obscured our view again. The friend driving never saw it and thought we were just messing around or something. We were too shocked to try and ask him to stop or something, which, in hindsight, I wish I had thought to do. But I was just completely dumbfounded in the moment. Back when I was a client and not an instructor, I was taking a 2-week overnight survival training program with the organization I would eventually work for. The property the org was using at the time was incredibly creepy. It was bought for cheap off of an infamous cult that operated in the area. The cult had technically been dismantled, but they were still holdouts. I'm not a superstitious person nor a big believer in the supernatural, and I have no stomach for ghost stories, but there were areas in that property that always felt off. That no one would willingly go to. There was one particular area that was a half-burnt-out patch of woods. Everyone would give it a wide berth because it always felt like someone was watching you, and there was always this overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. Anyway, back to this survival program. We were in week 2 and were starting our survival treks. I was still pretty green, so I chose to situate my shelter near the central area and main property thoroughfare. I put together what was frankly not a very good debris hut and went to sleep. I woke up precisely at midnight. I had a wristwatch, in the middle of that half-burnt-out patch of forest. Clear on the other side of the property from where I set up my shelter. It was nearly pitch black, the only artificial light source I had was the indiglow on my watch, and it took me over 2 hours to get back to my shelter. With a lot of that time spent trying to find a way out of that burnt-out patch in the dark. I was definitely going around in circles at one point. Fortunately, once I managed to get onto one of the trails, it was fairly easy to get back. I knew the trail system pretty well even in the dark, and, as mentioned, my shelter was just off the central meeting area. When I did eventually get to my shelter, it was completely trashed. My instructor had stashed an emergency wool blanket for me, and I used it to keep warm until sunrise. The easiest explanation is sleepwalking. I've never had any sleepwalking incidents before that point and haven't since. I've lived a pretty interesting life, and to this day that is one of my most bizarre experiences that doesn't really have a good explanation. Every single one of us who worked at that property or spent significant time there has had some sort of unexplained incident. Going back to this creepy property. A few years later, at that point I was an instructor, we bought an additional patch of land off of one of those holdout cult-affiliated neighbors. This patch had a house on it that we were going to use as a headquarters instead of the non-permanent shelters we had put up previously. When we opened it up for the first time, We found blood everywhere. On the walls, on the floors, even on the ceiling. We told ourselves that it was animal blood and cleaned it up and repainted. Eventually we put up a chicken coop and had about 24 chickens with a pretty nice enclosure. One morning we woke up and all the chickens were gone. During the night the neighbors had stolen them. We could see across the property line that they had set up some sort of makeshift altar and appeared to have sacrificed some of our chickens. And we kept on finding makeshift altars with more of our dead chickens on our side of the property in various out-of-the-way areas. Including several in that burnt-out forest area. We would eventually sell the property. It was difficult not having our own property to work off of, but no one missed how absolutely upsetting and oppressive that area felt. It's been many, many years since I last set foot there, and I've yet to come across any other patch of wilderness that felt as strange. Not exactly something I've seen, but something I've heard. I was sleeping in my room with me and my brother, with my bed facing diagonally to the bathroom, enough to see the shower and a bit of the bathtub. We had this little solid plastic stool in the bathroom that you would use while sitting on the toilet so your feet wouldn't dangle off. It was for my brother since he was about 4 at the time. We kept it under our sink in the bathroom, so the only way to get it out was to bend over and grab it from under, as we had a floating sink. I woke up at around 2 a.m. and heard the stool being shuffled across the ground by something or someone. I sat up and tried to look into the bathroom from my bed. Being the little kid I was, I absolutely did not investigate. The lights were off, and we had no pets, and my brother was sound asleep in the bed next to me, and my parents used a bathroom in their room, so I have absolutely no clue who was shuffling the stool. I told my parents in the morning, but of course they didn't believe me. To this very day I'm still confused about who was moving it. When I was 23 or something like that, my father went to the hospital for a few days. He had a catheter because he had a bladder issue or something like that, I don't remember exactly. One day I went to visit him. While I was talking to him in the room, he asked me to go with him to the bathroom because he felt uneasy down there and wanted to check if everything was alright. So, we went to the bathroom. Once we arrived, he went in, and I waited for him outside. A few minutes passed, and I heard him calling me for help. As soon as I entered the bathroom, I saw his pajama pants and the floor around him covered in blood and pee. He asked for help to clean up that mess because he tried to remove the catheter. Except I couldn't help him because that sight made me pass away. I fainted and found myself in my bedroom, at home. I was floating over my bed and was looking at the pillow, at the sheets. I didn't see or feel any part of my body. I was just conscious. I turned my sight and looked at the window. I saw the sun's rays getting through the window. They were beautiful. A shiny, warm color. Never saw a color like that. While I was looking at the sun rays, I felt someone slapping my face. So I turned my sight, opened my eyes, and I was back at the hospital. In my father's bedroom. A nurse and a doctor were next to me. The doctor was slapping my face. That got me scared, and with terror I said to him, "Why the heck am I here? I was in my bedroom just a few seconds ago." That experience got me really scared and made me think how close we are to death and the other side. We are just tightrope walkers. Under us, the vast sea of the unknown. I've got 1 seeing and 2 hearing. The seeing was during my first experience with sleep paralysis. I'm home for the summer from college and sleeping in the basement, where we had a spare bedroom. I wake up, can't move, but out of the corner of my eye at the head of the bed, I see a woman's form sitting there. She's facing away, and her arms were moving, like she was manipulating something in her hands. Sleep paralysis ended, and she was gone after a couple of minutes. The scariest one was in that same room a few years later. I got home from work at around 7:30 p.m. I was the only one home for the weekend, and that was the last night I would be alone. As soon as I got home, I felt like something was off. I had dinner, did some gaming, brought in the dog, and tried to go to sleep around 11. The whole time, that off feeling was getting stronger. I couldn't sleep, and I was feeling that off feeling even more. And then, around 2, I had checked the clock a few minutes prior, I heard a deep, loud voice right next to my ear. I don't know what it said, but I shot up, lights on, and I was out of the room. The feeling was now full-blown panic. After a minute, I went and got the dog. He hated strangers and had a great nose. So I let him out, and we walked through the house. But when we got to the room, he would not go in. He planted his front paws and whined when I tried to nudge him in. I closed the door, put a couple Bibles in front, and hung a crucifix necklace on the doorknob. A few months after that, still in that room, I was taking a nap after work. I woke up to the feeling of a hand holding my arm to the bed and then squeezing. In a panic, I just started reciting the words to what a friend we have in Jesus, and as soon as I got to Jesus, The sensation vanished. That was the last of it there. The last one was another hearing, at my parents' new place. They got an acreage about 10 miles into the country. I was visiting for the weekend because they had just gotten a pair of puppies, so of course I stayed for the weekend. I was sleeping on an air mattress in the living room because my then girlfriend was along, and she got the actual guest room. Dad told me to get him if I heard a ruckus outside in case something got into the dog's kennel. Around 1 a.m. or so, I'm dozing off, and I hear a bang from the front door, like someone had hit it with both hands. I got up, got Dad, he got his gun, and we went to look. Nothing outside, no weird vehicle tracks or footprints. Still have no idea what that was. When I was a kid, I used to love to watch these live cooking shows on cable, the kind where a host would bring a chef on for a demonstration. I was watching one while my dad was in the other room working. I was maybe 6 or 7. It was a male host and he'd brought in a sushi chef master. He introduces the sushi master, and they talk briefly about the dish. I remember watching really intently when the host says something about seeing an audience member. They both look up in what felt like through the camera. The host says, "She's a cute little girl, isn't she?" The chef nods and gives a wave. I got sort of scared. Could they see me? Doubted it, but then again they kept looking up to wink or wave. Suddenly the host asks, "How old are you?" I tell them. He asks for a name, I say mine, and he literally repeats it. I do not have a common name. Was also a very bashful child. I become mortified and need a pant leg to hide behind. I look to the other room and see my dad is still working, unbothered, so I tell the host/chef, i.e., television, that I'm going to get him. The host chuckles and says something like, "Aw, don't do that," and then to the chef, "She's shy, she's getting her father." I bring my dad in from the other room and present him before the television, except it had cut to commercial. My dad just goes back to working, doesn't think anything of it, and was too young to explain it to him. After the commercial break, it's an entirely different broadcast. No host. No sushi chef. I wouldn't say that no one believes me, since this is going to be me talking about dreams, and I don't really talk to others about them, but some of the unsettlingly vivid recurrent dreams I've had have really been creepy. Typically my realistic dreams take place in roughly the same setting, usually in a house with changing/shifting/flooding/broken rooms, but occasionally I could make it outside of the house in the recurrent dreams. There was one moment in particular when I was going down a staircase with a door at the bottom leading out into some back alleyway area. Some ways down from the door I initially stepped out of was a busted down, spewing, leaky pipes bathroom I had entered into to wash my hands in the dream while getting drenched by the pipes in there. As I was exiting that bathroom to head back to the door and staircase, I had this eerie feeling to look behind me in the dream, instead of just going forward to get out of there. When I looked back, there was a broken window frame on some building within the alley a good distance away from where I was standing. In the dark of the window, there were eyes staring me down, followed by a set of hands grabbing the frame and a figure launching themselves out of the window towards me. Thankfully it was not a stereotypical trip and fall along the way to the door to escape. However, being damp from the leaky pipe slowed me down a bit and also made it difficult to get a grip on the doorknob initially. I could hear the figure getting way too close to me before I got the door to open and held it shut out of fear. I never looked back to get a better view of what the figure looked like, but it felt so real. I knew it wasn't, and it feels silly that it has been so prominent in my brain still. This dream happened at least 5 or so years ago, but it really spooked me. I haven't had another dream quite like this moment since. A few years ago I was free diving in the small kelp forest off the English seaside town of Worthing with some friends. I encountered a huge shoal of these shiny silver fish about the size of my hand. I have no idea what they were, probably mackerel or something. They obviously didn't like me, so they avoided going near me. I spent a minute or so swimming around them, but I needed to go up for air. I pushed off of a rock and ascended very quickly. I was only 6 or 7 meters down, so nitrogen sickness was not a concern. This spooked them, and because I was under some, it forced them to the surface. When I broke the surface to regain my breath, I was surrounded by a turbulent storm of these fish jumping about a foot out of the water. Some of them landed on my head, and after 5 seconds or so, a particularly large one jumped, tried to swim in the air, and delivered a resonating slap right on my cheek. It hurt a lot for a fish, so I swam back to shore to examine my wound. As soon as I got back, I explained the entire story to my friends. They called BS, and I even showed them the red mark. But unfortunately, such marks also look like cold damage to the skin when you swim in really cold water. They ridiculed me for it until an almost perfectly tail-shaped bruise appeared on my cheek. They believe me now, but my family are still dubious, as they did not see the bruise. The summer after I graduated from high school, my friend Kay and I helped our friend A house sit while her dad was out of town. He had a 2-story house, and after we arrived, A told us that the house was supposedly haunted by a little girl. Kay was a little unsettled, and I kind of took it at face value. I'd always liked spooky stuff but never really had an experience outside my old house. I also kind of figured she was joking since we were both into ghost adventures at the time. So the three of us hung out at the house for a bit before we decided to get some food. Throughout the whole time we were there, nothing happened. After running a late-night trip to Walmart for snacks, we get back to the house pretty late. We went into the kitchen, and Kay placed the bag on the table before we all went upstairs to change for bed. I went back downstairs to the kitchen to get some water, and shortly after, I heard someone run down the stairs. A moment later, I heard the plastic bag rustle like someone was going through it. I assumed it was Kay since out of the corner of my eye the person who came downstairs had long hair. I called out to Kay, but didn't get a response, so I walked out of the kitchen area into the dining room, and nobody was in there. I grabbed the bag and went up the stairs quickly, and sure enough, I found both of them were sitting in the master bedroom watching TV. I asked them if anyone had gone downstairs after me to get anything from the bag, and they just looked at me. I explained what happened, and they thought I was just lying to scare them. I honestly don't know if they believed me or even wanted to since we still had to get through the night, but I didn't go back downstairs alone after that the rest of the time we were there. I found a white puffy fabric coat hanger in my wardrobe after being away for the weekend, my roommate also having been away. The front door was slightly ajar. I lived in an apartment block on the first floor, when I got back, and the coat hanger was stuffed into the middle of my wardrobe amongst my clothes. I didn't own this coat hanger, and neither did my roommate. I actually was really fussy and had bought all matching wooden coat hangers and had my clothes organized across my wardrobe in color order and had made it a really big feature part of my room. It freaked me out so much, not because it was a coat hanger, but because why was it there and who put it there? My room was opposite the front door directly but wasn't the closest door to the front door. My apartment block was gated and required a key to get in the gate and the front door, and only about 40 people lived in my building. I have smoked weed for the last 15 years of my life. As a teen, I smoked a lot. I and my friend went out at night. I find this applicable to suggest it was likely not me being too high, but I doubt what I saw because it was so weird. We lived in a very small town in British Columbia, Canada. You know when you close your eyes it can look kind of colored and fuzzy, phosphenes, it is called? Anyways, it was like that, but the color was concentrated into a humanoid shape. It was, I'm guessing, about 15 feet away from me on someone's fence. It moved weird, jittery like the closed eye colors, but would climb over the fence, peek its head back, stick its leg over, etc. I just stood there staring at it and asked my friend if she saw it. She's like, yeah. The pink thing? That's really effing creepy. I tell myself it could have been us very stoned seeing else, doubt this, or maybe I just saw something more explainable, and she decided to mess with me. But later, there was one person who believed me. When I started telling him about this, he immediately perked up and said, OMG, was it purple? Apparently he and his friend saw something very similar in the mountains one night while they were driving around in their Jeep, a similar description but taller and purple. It apparently terrified them. One summer about 2 years ago when I was on a day trip in Calgary with my then girlfriend, a lot of these seem like they're in Canada for some reason, lol, we were at St. Patrick's Island just north of downtown because neither of us had been there before and had nothing better to do and wanted a nice spot to make out. So after making out for, probably an hour or so by the water, we're standing on this little metal bridge near the big street light sculpture, and someone walks behind us, no big deal. So after about a second and a half, I glance over, and no one is there. There's about 100 feet down the path before someone going that way could have been out of sight, and judging by their pace, they weren't walking that fast. So right as I'm about to brush it off, my girlfriend, who noticed me looking around, said, "You heard that too?" I just froze as a chill ran down my spine. So we both looked around, and we were completely alone on this entire island, no one around at all, nowhere for anyone to scurry away and hide, and even though neither of us felt scared by the passing of this presence, we were both just left really unnerved by this and left not too long afterwards. Everyone I've told this to since has brushed it off, and like I would have too if I was the only one that experienced it. It felt so real, though. I swear I felt the vibrations of someone's footsteps behind me in the metal grate of the bridge, and like that same feeling you get in your skin when someone gets close to you, and I wasn't the only one who felt that. I've always thought it would make sense that the world and reality we live in are much larger than our ability to perceive all of it with our human senses, and this was the most direct encounter of that I've ever experienced. I've got two. My sister's first. My sister was in Rio de Janeiro visiting family, but instead of staying with my godmother, she spent a night at a hotel because she was out partying with our friend. Late at night she was in the hotel, sitting in front of a TV, and started passing out asleep. She said she was in and out of sleep, and every time she nodded off, she heard two men, one on each side of her head, shouting at each other, with her caught in the middle. She'd wake up alert from the shouting, but as she nodded off again, the men started shouting at each other. She said it was like two men having a fight, but they were unaware of her being there. My story: I did a meditation with a spiritual healer. I was on my bed, and she was standing above me doing her healing. She walked around my bed to heal different parts of my body, like my ankles. I went into a semi-meditative state and saw a large and towering androgynous being. It was huge, standing above me to my left at the side of my bed. It had its arms outstretched in a cruciform shape like Christ the Redeemer in Rio, which felt protective. It had what looked like a fencing outfit on with a fencing mask, but it was dark instead of white. I saw this for a few seconds when I opened my eyes slightly and had come out of meditation. I then closed my eyes again and saw some healing visions. After, the healer told me she had called on angels to help with the healing. I told her what I saw, and her eyes widened. She said out loud, "Metatron." She was amazed at what I described. I've never felt the same way again and longed for that experience. I'll never forget one night I was walking home from hanging out at my local park when I was in my teens. It was on the cusp of darkness when I and my friend heard this really weird noise. It sounded mechanical but very strange. The noise came from a farm field off to our left, but you couldn't really see it much because it was covered by trees. We both asked each other if we knew what the sound was. Neither of us did. Next thing you know, we walked past a house with an older gentleman sitting on the porch. He said, "Never in my life have I heard anything like that," so we asked, "Could it be just farm machinery?" He responded with, "No, all the farm machinery is done for the day, you boys should really get home." I can still remember his face being completely spooked. We never truly figured out what the sound was, but I remember it like it was yesterday. At the time I wasn't a believer in UFOs, but after that incident it made me think, that's for sure. I wouldn't call this scary, but I would describe it as the biggest mystery of my childhood. When I was 7, I went to stay with my granny and pawpaw for a week, and while I was there, I had a tooth fall out. We put it under my pillow that night. So during this visit, I was sleeping on a feather bed at the side of my grandparents' bed, the bed on one side and a wall on the other. At some point during the night as I was trying to fall asleep, I saw a bright light from behind my eyelids. I opened my eyes and I vividly remember seeing a small light making its way across the room at the foot of the bed. I figured it was just my pawpaw with a flashlight, getting out of bed to go to the bathroom, so I closed my eyes. But then my pillow moved. I investigated and found my tooth had been replaced by $1. I saw the tooth fairy. This was a cool story to tell as a kid, but it's been 20 years and I still can't figure out a proper explanation for what that light was. I could ask my grandparents, but I'm not sure if I want to. It may ruin the magic of the memory for me. The aftermath of a car accident that mangled the car and left the 3 occupants separated from each other and their own limbs and body parts by meters. Think I was 16? Dad and I were doing one of our fishing trips we always did every 2 weeks in spring and summer. For some reason this time Dad decided we would go to a different lake, one that had recently had a flow of water again for the first time in years, which meant the fish population would be shooting up and full of naive and foolish fish, or so he said. We had to pass through another town, so Dad decided to get some worms as bait at the service station on the lakeside of that town. He made me get the worms while he fueled up the car. As that was happening, this Nissan Pulsar that had a lot of body work done to it came blitzing past well above the speed limit, blasting some form of EDM that was basically just heavy bass doofing every second that vibrated the very air around it. Dad just laughed, called them dumb cunts, and kept pumping the fuel. We left and made a turn shortly after down a loose gravel road. Dad slowed down as anyone should do, those roads can be treacherous if you hit them too fast. We turned a corner, and there it was, that Nissan Pulsar that had sped past the servo. It looked like it had fishtailed coming around the corner and clipped a tree with its rear, then flipped a few times, ripping the car and its occupants apart. Dad pulled over and made me call 000 while he went and checked. I made the mistake of getting out of the car after finishing the call to have a look and was greeted with the sight of a severed arm, leg, and some other mass of human body parts. It was 2 guys and a girl. I think one of the guys and the girl were step-siblings or half-siblings, and she was dating the other guy, or that's what I remember from the news article on it. 21, 20, and 19. Lives were lost because someone was a fucking idiot and drove around like a hoon. I was in New York, staying in Fitzgerald's Hotel opposite Grand Central Station. I heard a massive explosion and looked out the window, seeing billowing smoke coming from around the corner, followed by masses of people screaming and running towards me / away from the scene. People screaming bomb and the like. This was in 2007, I think? So 9/11 was still fresh, Ground Zero was still a lot of rubble. I remember I fell to my knees. I was absolutely terrified. I crawled out of the hotel room with my sister to go to my parents, they were in a different room. I was 16 or so, I think. I was honestly numb. We all ran downstairs and were on lockdown for hours. I was just so scared. Turns out a transformer exploded under the station and broke a steam pipe or something. Unfortunately, 2 people did die. I was relieved, of course, but to this day I get scared thinking about it. Then, I feel guilty for being scared because there was no threat. It made me feel even more sad for those affected by 9/11, which is, realistically, everyone in New York at least. The absolute terror they went through. I can't even compare to that. That was the scariest thing I have seen. So the house behind my house was basically a trap house. It got foreclosed on, and it was left abandoned for years. There was this creepy, gnarled tree in the backyard. A big wooden fence separated our backyard from that property. My bedroom window faced this part of the yard. Well, one day I was chilling in my room. A chill ran down my spine, and I immediately got freaked out. I turned around, and my heart dropped into my stomach. There was a baby hanging from the tree. It wasn't a baby, just a doll. But I remember freaking the fuck out about it, and nobody cared because, of course that house would have something like that, ha ha ha. Would have definitely included a paranormal story, but my parents were really good about always believing me when I said I saw something. Never did I have an issue with my parents not believing I saw a ghost or something weird. That was pretty much the only time they just blew me off when I freaked out about something strange, ha. A while ago, I was leaving work late. I had stayed to send some emails, and everyone else had gone. I was locking the door behind me when I heard a huge crash come from inside. It was an incredibly loud and prolonged sound, like something massive crashing to the floor. I thought somehow a bookshelf or something must have fallen over, so I unlocked the door again and walked back inside to see what it was. I walked into the office closest to the door, assuming it probably came from that room as it was so loud. I swear the desk was swaying wildly like an extremely localized earthquake. Which doesn't make sense, I know. But nothing was out of place. I looked in every room, and everything looked completely normal. I was super confused and kind of weirded out, so I just left and locked the door again and went home. The next morning, I told what had happened during the morning tea break, but everyone just shrugged or didn't believe me. So bizarre. I grew up in the heart of a local national park. When we were like 11, my best friend and I would frolic around going on little hikes around the bushland. One afternoon, we were strolling down our regular route. To the side of the path, there was something odd looking. We, being curious children, went to have a closer look. It was some type of fresh, internal organ. I can't quite recall what it was or what sort of being it came from, but I can still remember the way that the stick we poked it with bounced against that rubbery thing. It felt so muscular. It was sort of small, so I'm thinking it may have been an animal heart, but like I said, I honestly can't remember it too vividly. It was vile and disgusting, and we were both kind of shooketh. I had honestly forgotten about this completely. I wasn't sure if it was a weird dream or not until the other day when my best friend asked if I remembered the organ we found in the bush. That solidified that this memory was, in fact, not one of my weird dreams. Writing it out, it doesn't sound that awful, but in the moment, it was so incredibly perturbing. A couple of months ago I decided to download a sleep recording app that only records when you snore for funsies. The few times I've used sleep recording apps in the past, all the snoring it captured was just me barrel rolling and cars passing by. One night I wasn't feeling super well, had to wake up at 8 a.m., and went to bed after everyone had left for work at 5 or 6 in the morning. I was like, wow, I wonder if I snore when I'm super tired, and decided to actually use it for the 2 hours I'd be sleeping, like a silly little experiment. I hit record and fell asleep maybe 10 to 15 minutes later. I turned my alarm off and stopped the recording, barely even awake as I'm skimming through the few audio clips it saved. As I expected, a majority of them were just me rolling around and the occasional car passing by. And then I get to the final one. The timestamp reads a few minutes before I woke up, so it was recent. I'm listening, and this one's kind of quiet except for distinct footsteps going from my door right to my bedside, where my phone was recording. All I hear is a man's voice clear as day saying okay and footsteps like they were walking away. I checked everyone's location again to make sure no one came home in the 2 hours I was asleep, and nope. All at work. We keep every door and window locked. The only thing I could think was maybe the wind had carried someone's voice through the vent due to the wind, but I literally heard the weight of my floor shifting and a man's voice. It was right into the microphone. I sent it to the family group chat, was told it was the wind, like I told myself, went to work scared as hell, and haven't touched the app since. I learned to mind my business that day. I still think about it every night before I fall asleep, though. When I was around 10, I lived in a townhouse, and my room was on the second floor. The head of my bed was against the only window in the room. One night I woke up to a low humming noise and a bright green light coming in from what I thought was the windows. It looked like a big square hole high on the wall to my left and past the foot of my bed. I sat up, confused, thinking that maybe I had accidentally turned around in my sleep and that I was facing the wrong way in bed. I thought maybe I was seeing lights from the neighbors or someone outside. I looked behind me, and the window was there and definitely not lit up. I looked to my right side and saw my digital clock was at around 2:30 a.m. Still confused, I looked forward at the glowing green light and suddenly felt what I can only describe as pure dread. I didn't know why, I just felt sudden, absolute fear. I tried to scream, but I couldn't, and suddenly I was frozen, couldn't move, couldn't make a sound, and I just stared at this green square in dread for what felt like forever as the humming sound got super loud. Then the light slowly dimmed, and I saw the square close. It looked like a section of wall had been swung inwards, and it slowly swung closed again, and the sound stopped. And then I screamed. My mom rushed in and tried to figure out what was going on, and I told her all the things. She told me it was probably just sleep paralysis or something and that it was a dream. I believed her because I think I needed to in that moment to cope. Years later she told me she didn't believe it was sleep paralysis and that she didn't know what I saw, but that I was so lucid she knows I saw something. I don't know what to believe, but the thing that gave me pause was the fact that I was able to sit up, move around, and try to logic my way around what I was seeing, and only after that did I freeze. I'd never had sleep paralysis before, and I've never had it since, now 29.